Hello, welcome to my final exam. We made it. The semester is almost over. I'm a little late on this project, but I'm getting it done. It's also 50 degrees outside, so I'm gonna be cold. Just watch. So I'm gonna start off by, let's just say what this video is. I took a class called Atheisms and Secularisms, aka Heathens. It was just super interesting. I didn't know a whole lot about the class, about atheism at all. I knew a little bit about secularism, but so I was really interested, signed up, and here we go. This is what I've learned. I hope no sirens come because I am outside. So one of the first things we discussed in the class was the separation of church and state. It was a really interesting thing to talk about because I have definitely obviously heard about it. I've taken lots of government classes, but to study it from a atheist or secular point of view, just basically how they view it, or what the difference is between a Christian or an atheist looking at different rules or laws, was super interesting. So definitely, I don't know if discuss church, discuss state. I definitely think they need to be separate because the whole checks and balances and things just some of the stuff we talked about were was the founding fathers intentionally creating these laws and rules with the idea of a separate church and state, right? But we talked a lot about in the class the influence Christianity had on all of it, regardless, because it was the religion at the time. When America was founded, Christianity was very, very, very rampant, and lots of churches, although there was religious freedom, there just was a lot of Christianity, and that had a pull and an influence on things. And so one of the questions the professor said that we should think about was how and why the importance of change over time. And that is a really difficult question, I think, in some ways, because just for me, studying something like the removal of, and I can't remember if we talked about this in class, maybe we did, the removal of certain things such as the Confederate flag or some statues, or changing the names of sports teams. Those are some things that they were different back in the time, but now that we've grown as a country, they need to be changed. But there's also I know some really sensitive subjects on that, and so I personally am kind of torn. I love tradition. I think that's a really cool thing in America. I feel culturally tradition is super important to an established country, but definitely change is of utmost importance. It's something that a country cannot grow and evolve and become what it is without changing and without becoming better than it was. So that is separation of church and state and change and evolving. Sorry about that. We'll just so the next thing we're going to talk about are some of the books we talked about in class, and I loved them. They were super interesting. So the first one is called Living the Secular Life by Bill Zuckerman. So that was the first one we read. It was I love reading, and I love philosophy, and so and religion, that's what I study, and so reading about anything relating to that was amazing. And so this is almost kind of the middle ground for me, personally, what I study is kind of almost this. And so Phil Zuckerman was basically in this time in America, he was proving that no religion is becoming very, very popular, more than I think current Christians would like to admit more than current consensus. Like, I feel like it's just, he was bringing up really valid points about how God is being more and more chosen. Like, people are like, no, like, I choose, because if you had like that card that's like, what are you, like, are you a Christian, are you an atheist, like, they're just like, no religion, like, none of the above. Like, what does that mean? We talked about that in class, and like for a lot of people it's basically just what it is. It's like, I don't have religion, I don't want to put a label on it, which was something in another book we'll talk about later. But yeah, it was really eye-opening to read about that, because I've already like definitely seen that, especially with friends. I know this was like a class like this was hard for me to open up and talk. Sorry, again, fidgety, it's cold outside. It was hard for me to open up and talk because it was a like almost like sensitive topics. It's like very kind of personal, and I didn't know how like the class would react, or like if I was gonna say things that were like really different, and like that's totally fine, but like I just didn't know like what's gonna happen. And so for me, my personal experience, like I remember the first day in class I was like, do I say this, do I like wait, but I remember like saying something about how like in college there's definitely, I've seen it like firsthand, like a lot more of my friends saying like, no, like I have no religion, when I know they've been raised religious or they've professed a faith for years, like me knowing them personally, and then just like college just switched. Like, it's crazy. And so that was my tied to that book. It was really interesting to see kind of more like historically like the non-religious America historically, and like totally current, like with society and choosing to not believe something. So that was Living the Secular Life Feels Like Ruin. The next one is Free Thinkers by Susan Jacoby. So this book, Free Thinkers, I love the name, very interesting. Talks a little bit about the separation of church and state, like we previously talked about. Talked about atheist activism, which was something that I had known nothing about, like absolutely nothing. And that's I love becoming enlightened in a sense. Like, I love learning more. It even talked about the feminist movement, which was super interesting. The class discussion for this book was really great. I remember, I think I led a discussion on this one day, and just hearing how actually no, I didn't, maybe I did, I'm sorry, the semester's crazy. But hearing what other people thought about should God be in the Constitution, or feminism and atheism, how it ties together, was like really interesting, because I studied feminism a little bit, but I've never taken a course on it. And so I got to hear about fellow classmates that have taken that course, and so that was really interesting too, to like hear that. And so yeah, there was also, like, reading my notes, there was like people like Thomas Jefferson, Abraham Lincoln, and Thomas Paine that were like historically like famous free thinkers. And we talked about this, which I found super interesting, was that even like Abe Lincoln, like he was a historically like free thinker, like he promoted like separation of church and state, yet when you look back on it, so many Christians are like, yeah, he was a great guy, like good old Abe, he was a Christian. Like, they'll take like parts of his speech and make it like his whole career, and I think it's like quite misleading. And so that was another good part of the book to learn about that. So that was Free Thinkers. The next one was Atheist in America by Melanie Brewster. What was this one? Atheist in America. Ooh, this was interesting. Talking about age, race, sexual orientation, religious upbringing. These were personal narratives that I remember in the class, like so many of us totally like related to these personal narratives. So it was really great to like read about these, and like, you know, they always say like, oh, I'm not alone. It was literally like all these moments of like, whoa, like other people think about this the same way I do. And like I remember like tons of the people that in the book that they that Melanie Brewster talked about were like had really similar stories and upbringings to me. And so it was like really great to like read about them and their process, and kind of the process I'm going through now. And so it was like really cool. So that was Atheist in America. great discussion about that book, again, because there's just lots of fresh ideas, and like hearing perspective on like tons of different perspectives on an issue like this, or like a topic like this, not issue, like about atheism and secularism and like what people believe, is like something like really refreshing that I wish we did more, but that's just my thing. The next one is Our Non-Christian Nation, Jay Wexler. It's a little loud. Our Non-Christian Nation. That is our second to last book. I'm trying to remember all of the things and look at my notes. Yeah. Oh, this is the Our Non-Christian Nation, the nuns, right? Where's that? Did I miss my notes? No, it was Our Non-Christian Nation. So this is, to me, this was really similar to the first book, which was Living the Secular Life, in the sense that more and more people are saying that they choose no religion. And so, like, I did find a lot of similarities in that, and I think a lot of our classmates did. Yeah, oh, in this book we talked about the pagan holiday wreaths, the, like, Christian symbols, and, like, what can you put up, what can you not. I don't know, this book was interesting for me just because, like, I went to a really conservative high school, and, like, I mean, not now, but, like, I used to live in, like, a really conservative town, that just, Christianity is, like, everywhere, and so, like, reading this was, like, really eye-opening. Like, I don't even realize how much, like, significance to all the Christian, like, wreaths and, like, Christmas trees and, like, signs, like, in my neighborhood. It's like Merry Christmas, like, huge, like, on a, like, garage, like, and I don't even, like, you don't think about it, and then you realize, like, I remember hearing classmates saying, like, it can just be, like, all the time, like, almost, like, overbearing, almost, like, I don't know exactly how they would describe it, but just, like, hearing, because, like, you just, yes, you assume there's so many Christians, but also, like, you have to think about, like, the non-Christians, or you don't have to, some people don't, but to think about the non-religious, and especially at a time where there's so many non-religious people, to have all this Christian, like, ideology just floating, like, everywhere, like, even, I don't know, downtown Houston, I feel like I could probably pick out a couple of things right now, like, just, crazy. And so that book was really interesting, and, like, the discussion again was really great on that. Jay Wexler, super cool. And this was another one of, like, these kind of, like, personal narratives, almost, like, a little less than the other book we read, but another one, oh, the last book, Choosing Our Religion by Elizabeth Drescher. So we didn't get to talk about this one and have, like, a huge discussion on this book, because it was near, oh my gosh, sorry, their AC just turned on. Okay, now it's even colder, sorry. So Elizabeth Drescher, so this one we didn't get to talk a whole lot about because it was the end of the semester, and, like, things were happening, and presentations and stuff were, like, kind of crazy, and so we didn't get to talk about it as much as I probably would have liked, because it was really interesting. This is the one, Spiritual but Not Religious. She talked about all the different categories. So there is spiritual but not religious, atheist, agnostic, humanist, just spiritual, nuns, not N-U-N, N-O-N-E-S. That was a fascinating term for me. Like, I've never heard anyone call themselves, like, oh, I'm in, like, well, I've heard, like, oh, I'm a nun, like, I don't know, but again, see, that's just, like, a stereotypical nun thing. But so for a nun, N-O-N-E, they just would choose, like, I have no religion, I am none of the above, I am, even, like, you wouldn't even say, like, spiritual but not religious, that's a different category, but, like, seeing all these different categories was interesting. But another part that the author focused on was that people didn't want labels, and so nun is just another label, and so I was a little confused with that, and I know, like, our classmates were as well, but it was just, again, a great book, great discussion in the class. I really enjoyed our discussions because if I just read a book, you get the information, that's great, I love reading, but the discussion adds a whole nother level from, like, 20 other, like, classmates ranging in age and race and what they're studying. Like, not all of them are studying religion, not all of them are studying, like, philosophy or anything, it was really interesting. I loved it. Great discussions. another thing we got to do was something called show and tell. So this is not the books. This is like completely different. So the start of each class, we would have, one person be our show and tell leader, like kindergarten on steroid. No, it's just like great. So sorry, sometimes it gets a little loud. But so show and tell was super interesting. For my show and tell, I brought my high school Bible, and I was like, hey guys, my high school and like my like college Bible from like freshman year, like these are Bibles that aren't just like a piece, like a book. It's like something I had written in. I put things in it, like I do like lots of things and like put all of it in one place, almost like, I don't know, it's like almost like a scrapbook of like notes and like ideas. And so for me personally, like being raised Baptist, like I think Baptists are known to be like, they call them Bible thumpers. I don't know. I don't know if I should say that on YouTube, but hey. So yeah, I studied my Bible a lot in high school, especially when I was going through like all these like crazy things, and I just would like turn to that. And so I got to share that for my show and tell, and I was like, hey guys, like you can totally look through this, and I passed it around, everyone can see, and they could literally go through and see like prayers and notes and like all this stuff. And like it was really interesting to get like people like asking me questions about that, like what did this mean, or like why did you do this, or like did you carry it around everywhere? And I was like, pretty much. If you saw the amount of notes, I wish I brought it for the video, but just really interesting to hear people that have been raised atheist or raised non-religious to like hear their take on like my religious upbringing, or why I'm like, I've studied the Bible so much, and now I study religion, so like I could always just say that, but it was really like a personal thing when I was in high school. So that is my show and tell. Other people's show and tells were amazing. We got to see things like the prayer mats, like in Islam, like they do prayer 5 times a day supposedly, and so we got to someone brought in their husband's prayer mat. We saw things like the Catholic rosary, we saw some atheist things, like just really interesting. And so I loved it. It was like my favorite part of class, coming in and like getting to know my classmates better, and again that finding like similarities between them and just like getting to know them more is like we all opened up and we had better discussions. So it just was like a great class. And then the last thing, big picture, what will I do with all of this knowledge? I have a great example, because if you're not tired of my Into the Wild references yet, don't be, because here's another one. So a big way that I've been able to see like a difference in the way that I so like knowing more about atheism is the book Into the Wild. There is a character in there who I don't want to spoil it, but I'm gonna have to spoil it for like this example. Oh good, it turned off. I hope you can still hear me. You could earlier. There's a character named Franz. He was like a 90-year-old man who helped the main character in the book, Alex, or Christopher McCandless. He helped him find his way in certain situations, and like tried to give him money and he wouldn't take money. Just like Franz was like that fatherly figure. And so when Franz was like waiting for Alex to return, he would like write Alex here and there. When he found out that Alex had passed away, he like, someone told him, he didn't even like hear from like the authorities, like some like random person that just knew of Alex or Christopher McCandless. Like he goes by 2 names in the book, but he said that he was going to become an atheist because of that, because he said, how could a god take away someone like Alex, because he thought Alex was like the sweetest kid. So the first time I read that, this was back in high school, I guess maybe freshman year of college, a couple years ago, I was like, how could he turn away from God in a time of like struggle, or a time of like shaky faith? Because I've always been told like turn towards God when you're like questioning things. And so that was like my view on like hearing the word atheist in this story, in this book. It was based on a true story, and like hearing that he just was like, I'm atheist now, and he just snapped. I was like, how can you just make such a big decision like that? I also can't make big decisions ever. So for me, like I had such a hard time with it. And then after this class, I reread that part, like the whole book, but like that one part in particular, and it really stood out to me, because now I like totally understand where he's coming from. Like having these issues, he probably was already doubting God, and he's like all alone, and this old man by himself is probably having like a rough time with the whole God idea and with Christianity and whatever. And like a kid like this brings him a lot of hope and a lot of like adventure and great stuff. But then seeing that hope and that joy and that life and adventure taken away because he like passed away, and then him just saying he's an atheist, like that's the snap was the hardest part for me. But because I now know more about atheists and like secularisms, it's like, okay, like I can see that, like it was a really difficult time for him. And I'm definitely not saying that like whenever you're having a hard time you turn and you become an atheist. That's not it. There's lots of different scenarios, and we talked about that in class as well. But big picture, like I just understand the word atheist, and it's not like a scary word anymore. But I think the worst and best part about knowing more about atheisms and secularisms is when I hear the stereotypical BS of people like, oh, atheists are this or atheists, and it is like frustrating. And like I know, like I used to think like that in like a small scale, but the way some people are like super stereotypical and say nonsense, it's really rough. But I'm learning, and I love sharing what I learn, and so it's just going to be a great fun process. And I can't wait to take more classes like this and to open my mind more. So thanks for listening to my video, guys. I don't know who's gonna watch this, hopefully my professor. I'll send it. But yeah, it's been a great semester, and atheism and secularisms. Peace out.